Thank you very much. I'm Kelly Johnson. I'm president of the Confederation of Canadian Unions. Thank you for doing this. It's I don't know if you could really tell, but it is a working lunch, as we discussed with you for us. Thank you so much for doing this and taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And afterwards, I'm sure we'll have some questions for you as well about what's happening. We are in Ottawa. I'm not sure exactly where you are.
I'm here in my constituency in Thompson, Manitoba.
Okay, I do have an introduction, and then maybe after that you can give us a presentation.
Yep.
So Niki Ashton has been the NDP MP from Northern Manitoba since 2008. I hope that's correct. And also ran for the leader of the federal NDP in 2017. She has been a tireless advocate for workers' rights, equity, economic democracy, and environmental sustainability, and has made commitments to fair taxation, tuition-free post-secondary education, and a universal Pharmacare programs for all Canadians, amongst others. So I'll allow you to give what you're working on right now, if you can tell us.
For sure.
I'll put the floor open.
For sure. Perfect. And I very much welcome any questions that maybe go into a bit more detail as well. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Treaty 5 territory, the traditional territory of the Nisqually Cree Nation, from my home community of Thompson, Manitoba. I want to thank the organizers and all the members of the Confederation of Canadian Unions who invited me to join you today. And of course, it feels a bit close to sort of home because I have spent a lot of time in Ottawa over the years. But it's a real treat to be able to join you as part of your convention this weekend. The neoliberal agenda of privatization, austerity, job-killing trade deals has turned the clock back on working people. In the last few years, we've seen the rise of an even more precarious working class. Many members are young, racialized, immigrant, women, disabled, queer, and we have seen all across the board that for working people, inequality has increased. The COVID-19 pandemic that we've been through just recently exposed and quickly exacerbated the inequality and injustice that we face in our society, not just here in Canada, but around the world. I don't know if you all remember when early on in the pandemic, we kept hearing from our political leaders that we're all in this together. Well, it was pretty clear early on that that was definitely not the case. We know that the neoliberal agenda during the pandemic and more recently has proven not only dangerous, but even deadly. If we look at what happened here in Canada as a result of cuts, privatization, austerity, we know that the COVID pandemic proved particularly deadly for some more than others. For example, for our elderly, Canada, which lost more elderly people living in care homes to COVID than all other wealthy nations. We know that Indigenous communities were particularly hit hard. In fact, here in my own province, there was a disproportionate impact. 70% of Indigenous peoples, or 70% of the cases of COVID-19 were amongst Indigenous people, who make up only 30% of the population. We know that in the later waves of COVID, that the pandemic hit workers especially hard. And I want to acknowledge frontline workers, workers in long-term care homes, those working in warehouses, migrant workers, taxi drivers, working people that were forced to work throughout the pandemic without the protections and support necessary. We also know that over the last number of years, women workers have also lost significant ground. Inequality and the lack of structural supports like childcare are holding us back. We know that in many cases throughout the last few years, workers and their families paid for this pandemic with their lives. What's clear as we're coming out of the pandemic is that we cannot afford the status quo. It is critical to fight back. We need a transformative vision for our world, one that seeks to prioritize the well-being of people, of working people, and the survival of our planet over profit. A vision rooted in the power of the collective and collective action. A vision of a world where justice, including economic justice, are not just slogans, but a reality. Many on the front lines, like yourselves, are fighting for this kind of world. From decolonization to a living wage to racial justice to the need for a Green New Deal, a just transition. We are seeing the power of labor, and particularly grassroots labor, in a really exciting way here in our own country and around the world. But before I get into that, I want to talk a bit about what we need going forward. I believe that we need a clear message and certainly in solidarity with working people. We need a clear message of a transformative world where people's lives come ahead of profit. We know that right-wing governments have taken advantage of both the pandemic and the extreme inequality that has resulted to be able to oppress and marginalize working people and communities even further. We know that here in Canada, we have seen the richest in our country become richer. In fact, just this week, a damning report was produced by Canadians for Tax Fairness that said over half of Canadian corporations that access the wage subsidy, which was meant to support working people during the pandemic, used it in ways to enrich themselves. Not only did they pour that money into shareholder benefits, they also and stock buybacks. We know that many of these companies use tax havens. In fact, in one case, one of the corporations that accessed the Canadian emergency wage subsidy had 5 subsidiaries, all of them based in Bermuda. All of this was done with public funding. And as the Canadians for Tax Fairness said, what was used was public funding for private gain. We need to be clear in calling out that inequality and stating very clearly that this didn't just happen. It is a result of liberal and conservative policies that have allowed the richest, and particularly the richest of corporations, to only get wealthier on the backs of working people. We know that in doing this work, it's also very important to build solidarity. And that's why it was so important for me to join you today, because you are doing this important work. And it's important that we stand with you. And I acknowledge that there are political leaders around the world that do this kind of work on a regular basis. Leaders like Bernie Sanders that I look up to, just to the south of us, who works hand in hand with the grassroots labor movement in the States, and labor leaders who are calling for an end to the status quo, who are putting forward that transformative vision and aren't afraid to fight back. I believe that the ground is shifting. Just in the last few months here in Canada, we've seen some incredible examples of labor activism. And those of you in Ontario, I'm sure, were involved in expressing your solidarity with the education workers, CUPE members, that were willing to take their fight all the way against the provincial government that took the unprecedented step of threatening the use of the notwithstanding clause to pick a fight with some of the lowest paid workers in Ontario and the country. The way in which CUPE Ontario, and I want to acknowledge labor leaders like Laura Walton and Fred Hahn, fought back, was nothing short of inspiring. But as they pointed out, and I had the opportunity to invite Laura to be part of a discussion on this at the international level, in fact, She pointed to the fact that it all starts from the grassroots, building solidarity on the ground, having the backs of your members, and not being afraid to call out those that are waging a war on working people. I also want to acknowledge some of the work happening right now, even in the public sector. We've seen unprecedented calls for potential strike action through the members of the public sector, the PSAC, calling on the federal government for holding public sector workers back, and also acknowledging that the possible threats of austerity and a recession should not be used against working people who literally kept government going and our country going in many ways, most recently during this pandemic. I think of working people here in my home community, steelworkers and others who have stood up to large corporations in recent years and even months, in stating that the significant profits that they are making must also mean fairness, proper benefits, and supports for workers here on the ground. And I want to acknowledge emerging labor activism in sectors where we know unions don't exist yet or are beginning to organize, particularly in the gig economy, and I'm particularly inspired by the work of Amazon workers who are willing to stand up to some of the greediest of CEOs and corporations, and pushing back and organizing against incredible obstacles ahead of them. What's clear to me is that what we need is to support working people, to support the labor movement in the struggles that you are waging and leading right now. If we're going to talk about tackling inequality in our country, if we're going to talk about tackling the rise of the far right that often co-opts the language of working people and much of the struggles people are facing, if we're going to talk about taking on the climate emergency in our communities, we need to be working hand in hand with workers, with unions, with grassroots activists who are making a difference in our communities, who are pushing for justice at all levels. It is clear to me that there is not just great inspiration, but a vision there that we need to keep pushing forward. I mentioned Bernie Sanders a bit earlier, and one of the most inspiring political events I've ever had the opportunity to attend in my life was a rally that he hosted in Michigan back when he was running for president. And there, standing shoulder to shoulder with leaders of labor movements he'd worked with, he said a quote that's always stayed with me: "When the people lead, the leaders follow." It's people like yourselves that are leading that work on the ground, in your workplaces, in your communities, and beyond. And for us, it's really important to be able to work with you in not just supporting you, but calling out those in politics and in power that are keen to make a profit on the backs of working people, that are keen to distort the reality that you and many are facing. It concerns me that at the national level, we have a Liberal government that talked a good talk on the middle when it comes to the middle class, and has failed in so many ways to support working people. In fact, has legislated working people back to work. We know has refused to engage in key demands made by, as I said, many in the public sector, but also very importantly has failed to take on the raging greed that we're seeing from so many. Greed that seeks to profit off of the labor of working people. And I also want to take on a bit of what we're seeing from the Poilievre and the Conservatives right now, who have shifted their language, I would say, in a very opportunistic way to make it seem as though they are speaking on behalf of working people. I see the message he tries to share here in my community, a blue-collar town, a mining town, and the way in which he's trying to pretend that he's got the backs of working people, when in reality, we know when he was a key member of the Harper government, they had no problem going after working people every chance they got. And even now, as opposition, have failed to support initiatives that we in the NDP are putting forward, whether it's in terms of supporting anti-scab legislation, or whether it's taking on the rich and powerful, making sure that they pay their fair share of taxes. We don't need slogans and misinformation from the Conservatives when it comes to the reality of working people. What we need is real solidarity and action at the federal level, at the national level, to support the work and the struggles that you are waging. I think the work ahead of us or the work is cut out ahead of us. But I have tremendous hope in the work that you are doing, in the work that we can all do together. I'm proud of the work that we in the NDP are doing to support priorities of working people. As I mentioned, the anti-scab legislation, moving forward on dental care, moving forward on rental supports, moving forward on Pharmacare. But there is no question that there is much, much work to be done. And I have a very strong feeling that that is work that we can only do if we work together with you, with workers across our communities, with labor activists and labor leaders rooted in the everyday struggles of working people. I look forward to hearing your questions and working with you and our team going forward. Thank you very much.
We had you on mute. Sorry, Niki. Thank you for that inspiring speech. So you are looking at friends. So thank you very much for all the work that you do. My first question. I'm sitting on the hot seat here. So my first question is: a few years ago, we had a petition, online petition, and I think we got around 40,000 signatures around Pharmacare. And I do remember March 13th, 2020, not only the day when the pandemic began, but that was the first time the NDP put the legislation through. I think it was the first call or the first pass. Private members bill. Yeah, private members bill. And about Pharmacare, and it was 100% supported. Then it came to the second pass about 9 months later, and the support went away. I think the NDP voted for it, and there was maybe half a dozen Liberals, maybe, and no Conservatives. So what happened in between there? Why the reluctance at that time to do something that all Canadians want?
Well, I think we saw people's true colors. I'd have to go back in terms of the details of the votes. It could have been that first vote was to send it to committee. And sometimes other parties want to look good and say, this is something that we think is a good idea, we should look into. But that second vote, when it comes back from committee, if I remember correctly, is really the brass tacks. I mean, that really is a defining vote whether or not things will go forward. And for us, that's been the story, not just with the Conservatives but the Liberals as well. There's a lot of good talk about understanding the healthcare crisis, but the solutions are not what they need to be. And we'll just give the example of what's come out in the Premier's meetings in recent days. Some big money has been committed, but as many have said, without conditions to make sure that any of that funding will only stay with public to ensure public universal services in healthcare. We know, like in provinces like mine, Manitoba, obviously Ontario, and others, we have premiers that are gung ho on privatization of our healthcare services. And Justin Trudeau used some pretty cryptic language and it certainly is absolutely refusing to ensure that federal money is used the way it should be. Giving premiers like ours the chance to further privatize and destroy our public healthcare system. So, but going back to Pharmacare, and I really appreciate the work that that all of you did to send that very strong message. It's a message we heard loud and clear in the NDP. It is one of the key points in our agreement with the Liberals. We've been very clear that we want action on this before the end of the year, and so we are, we are keen to hold them to it. I know my colleagues, Don Davies, and well, he's our health critic, so he's been very involved on this file, and we will not rest until there is action on Pharmacare and some of those key priorities we've raised. So please keep the pressure on. The Liberals are also very slippery on this. But if you've got Conservative MPs, please call on them to be part of the solution. I mean, Pierre Poilievre is constantly talking about the healthcare crisis. Well, we know that part of that is also a pharmacare crisis, lack of access, lack of affordable access to the medication people need, the care people need, and please, don't let up on your representatives to make sure that they know that pharmacare is a key priority for you.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Sir, questions? Okay.
Announce your name. I'm Bill. Pardon me. I work at the University of Manitoba.
Oh, hello.
Hello. I'm sure we can all recognize the fact that it's either you're a grifter or you're not in our society these days. And it seems to me that electoral reform is currently being controlled by the grifters. The fairvote.ca is proposing their national citizens' assemblies for electoral reform. I wonder what you think about. You're a player. I wonder what you think about what we can do to make representation more appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I fully support electoral reform, and as was mentioned earlier, when I ran for leader, that was something that we were committed to. Obviously, there's different models, and I think there needs to be. There needs to be a change to the status quo. I mean, the current first past the post system is brutal and certainly not reflective at all of our of the will of the Canadian people. It's hardly, I would say, it is a hindrance in terms of our democratic process. We know that obviously it discourages folks from getting out and voting, making people feel that their vote doesn't matter. And again, there's another commitment that Justin Trudeau made when he was running to be prime minister that fell by the wayside. So I'm really thankful for the work that Fair Vote Canada does, and I know one of our colleagues that's again the critic on that, actually also from Manitoba, Daniel Blakey, has been very involved in this issue. More recently as the critic, and that pressure is critical. I mean, I think I would say, especially as we are seeing the rise of the far right. I mean, you're in Ottawa. We all watched very closely the way in which the convoy took over Ottawa. I mean, just truly unbelievable images. And those of us that know people who were deeply impacted, I mean, it's just shocking that would have happened in our capital city. These are folks that and I don't mean everybody, but certainly those leading the charge here we're very much ready to attack our democratic institutions and our democratic system. And to me, that's also another wake-up call that we've got work to do to make the current political system, electoral system we have, inject it in such a way, transform it, obviously, so it really is representative of folks. Like we can't afford to have people hijacking our system, but we also can't pretend that the status quo is acceptable. People's voices are clearly not being heard, and as we know, obviously, I mean, I'm not biased here, but if we had a different electoral system, those that vote NDP and tend to vote in more progressive ways would be. Thank you very much. much. I would, you know, you would have that more balanced representation, dare I say, and then of course, you know, regional representation. So please keep up the pressure, and you know, I know so many of us in the NDP team know that this is critical and are quick to point to the hypocrisy of Trudeau, who used it to score points and obviously dropped it as soon as he got into power.
Just mention one name which kind of vulcanizes us, anyways, in Manitoba, and that's Brian Pallister. Clearly did a great thing for us by being such a total idiot. I'll tell him to his. I saw him actually. He's a very. So I think we're
hard to miss.
What do you think we should do next? Like people like ourselves, what should
well, I mean, to be honest, I and I don't just say this because of the company I'm speaking to, but I think labor activism, labor organizing really is at the front end of what we're dealing with, right? I mean, I would say, you know, obviously we know climate change is a huge challenge in front of us. I mean, you're in Ottawa. That's for the first time in I don't know how many years the canal is not being opened for skating, right? I mean, there's Winterlude, except for what's missing is winter. You know, so I don't want to take away from that, but we are dealing with out of control inequality in our country. You know, kind of inequality we have not seen in our recent history. I mean, we know the inflation crisis is you know, I mean, I just turned 40. It's the first time in my generation's lifetime that they're seeing this kind of out of control inflation. You know, we know that the divide between the haves and the have-nots is growing in leaps and bounds. And like I said, this report just came out and said that. And to me, the front line in the fight back against that is labor. And you know, and I know it's not easy, especially as now we're starting to hear the words around austerity and possible recession and economic tightening. But we know in this case that it has nothing to do with working people, that it is truly large corporations that sure, there's international factors, but let's not kid ourselves. You know, large corporations are setting prices in various sectors, whether it's oil and gas or the grocery sector or the banking sector, that you know, they're looking at their profit margins and they're looking at those profit margins based on your work, on the work of working people. And so I would say that in the weeks and months to come, your work to push back on having your fellow members' backs, pushing your locals, your union to really be representing you know, your day-to-day struggles, and pushing back on your employers, because you know, I think many of us, what we're seeing certainly in Ottawa is things are not going in the right direction. But what I'm heartened by is a hunger from a lot of working people to say enough is enough. And you know, I know there's been recent studies done, and a overwhelming majority of Canadians are calling for bold taxation of the rich and the ultra rich in our country, right? Like numbers we haven't seen before, and so I think there's an appetite to push back more, and to push back on politicians that you know, might be using the right words but aren't actually taking on the status quo and aren't actually pushing the wealthy to pay their fair share. So I think keep doing what you're doing, and you know, I know many of you are involved in your community. I mean, so many of these struggles are local, and you know, building that solidarity with movements on the ground, Indigenous movements, climate movements, right? And finally, you know, keep holding your MPs feet to the fire. You mentioned even Pallister, right? I mean, it is incredibly powerful for us to hear from constituents, particularly engaged constituents who are saying, you're not representing me. These are the issues that are important to us. And, or, you claim to be speaking for the middle class or working people, and yet you're doing this. So, and we're not okay with that, right? So I would say, much of what you've done with Pharmacare, don't let up on us, and that pressure, I think, is palpable, especially as more and more people are saying, like I said, enough is enough.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions, Mark or Rob? Name and where you're from. Yep. Hi, Niki. I'm Mark Miller. I'm the vice president for CCU and a representative for CMA Carpenters in BC, in Castlegar, BC. My question is kind of a question, kind of a comment on your Pierre Poilievre rant there earlier. That man scares me quite a lot. He's got excellent little sound bites. He's very charismatic. And you mentioned the anger at the Liberals. I'm worried he's going to harness that and he's going to run away. The media loves him. They love showing his face and what he says. And, but the difficult thing obviously is what's behind the man. So I guess my question to you is, what can we do as union leaders to sort of expose that? Is there, nuts and bolts, is there a list somewhere of votes in Parliament and how everybody's voted over the years, or something simple that we can bring to our members and say, look, because I hear it regularly all the time. Oh, this new Poilievre guy, he's talking about working people and he's talking about screwing the corporations, and but it's all just a bunch of crap. So how do we expose that? And maybe that's a question that's too big to answer right here, right now, but it's something that's been really bugging me.
I love it. Well, first of all, I think we need your voice in Parliament and at the national level to tell it like it is. That's exactly. I mean, I feel like, you really nailed it. It is frightening. I mean, actually, on Thursday, so this big report that came out about corporations using public money for private gain, and it was done by a left-wing organization. In fact, I think it's partly funded by the labor movement, Canadians for Tax Fairness. And I've never seen it before. He was quoting from this report, right? I mean, he was it was shocking, right? So I think we need to be we eyes wide open with this guy. And I mean, I see the traction here in my community, right? Like a friend of mine who's a nurse was sharing his stuff from when he was running for leader. Not the convoy dog whistle stuff, but more the, system is broken piece. And it is frightening. And it's absolutely like you said, but what's behind the man? I mean, he wasn't a two-bit backbencher during Harper's years. He was a cabinet minister. He had power. And in fact, I just had a reminder the other day. He was one of the instigators of, I don't know if you remember that bill around voter suppression. Yeah, right. Where there was effectively voting, a fundamental right was going to be made more difficult for many people, and some people in particular, particularly Indigenous people, for example, seemed like a heck of a lot of people that don't usually vote Conservative. He was also somebody, right? They legislated people, workers back to work every chance they got, right? Postal workers, rail workers. We saw deep austerity, right? I mean, I don't need to remind you. I mean, I know many of you were fighting back. But what I think is particularly dangerous exactly is how he's trying to dupe people into thinking that, maybe he's shifted, but he understands the struggles. But my God, the solutions are not what they need to be. So I hear you loud and clear on tools to fight back. I think calling him out is critical. I think having those conversations in your workplaces, on the shop floor, in the offices, and saying, it's like, yeah, but look at his track record. I mean, he's been in politics for a good long time, right? And he's got plenty of actual votes and decisions and policies to point to. It's the same person. But I would say what's even more nefarious is the dog whistle stuff that we saw from him to win the leadership, particularly his alliance with the convoy stuff. We've seen a lot of right-wing populist leaders, Donald Trump and others, kind of use the faux we're on the side of working people stuff, but align themselves with alt-right, extreme, dare I say, fascist elements in our country, and so I would say this is it's not the same batch as Harper. Like this is even scarier, and so I hear you on the tools. So that's something I definitely I think is a good idea, and that's something that I can bring back even to our team, because I think these conversations need to happen at the grassroots level, person to person. We're certainly having them here in our community, but like I said, I mean, this guy knows exactly what he's doing, and we just can't let him do it.
Wolf in sheep's clothing, I'd say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
100%. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next question. We have one more question. Three more questions. Niki.
Sure. Hi, thanks so much. My name is Sean Kane. I'm from around Toronto. Hi, how are you? I think we've met before, maybe at an NDP convention, maybe very quickly. But I just wanted to ask about a couple of things about housing, because I'm from Oakville, which is just west of Toronto, and Oakville has now moved ahead of Toronto's being even more expensive average rent and housing prices. Rents in Toronto have doubled in just over 8 years. It hasn't even been a decade for them to double. And I wanted to ask if there's anything in the current agreement with the federal Liberals or anything that might be coming up with regards to a federal housing program, 1-2% of a federal budget investment into cooperative, social, and public housing. And then two, if I may be blunt, what kind of ultimatums can we put against the Liberals and Trudeau? Because boy, they love making promises they totally don't keep. If I may be blunt, what kind of ultimatums can we put on them by the end of 2023 and saying, look, if this isn't done, or this isn't at least even started with some money behind it, this agreement may not last into 2024. Mm-hmm. I know it's kind of a blunt question, but I know that other people here were kind of chatting about it during our lunch. So, but anyway, thank you. Great presentation, very inspiring, and keep on doing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Well, right back at you. Thank you. And I'll start with the second question. I think we're I mean, certainly I know our leader talked a bit about healthcare funding. We did see some movement, again, not in the right direction in terms of protecting public funds from privatization. But I think I certainly believe that we need to be setting out those ultimatums, because because Liberals are Liberals, they love to talk left and act right, and unfortunately we're seeing that on housing as well. Now I know we are making a very concentrated push in the lead up to this budget, including on Indigenous housing, which of course I represent a region with literally third world living conditions when it comes to housing, but I know we've been really pushing the social housing, co-op housing, and I'm hopeful we will see something there. But if we don't see what we need to see, I do believe we need to be having a very serious discussion about where we're going from here. We obviously know that housing insecurity is a major contributor to the inequality people are facing, particularly generational inequality, right? I mean, folks younger than me cannot imagine buying a home. I mean, most are trying to figure out how they're going to pay rent, let alone anything more long term. I mean, this is not just devastating news right now. I mean, this is devastating news for the future of our country, right? When you have a whole generation that can't do that, and so and I want to acknowledge that obviously with the out of control rate hikes from the Bank of Canada. I mean, there's another institution that the Liberals keep saying they have nothing to do with. I mean, let alone they set the mandate and appoint the governor. The inflation, right? The interest rate hikes are also putting a number of folks' mortgages in very precarious situations. So we need to see some real movement on housing. And I think what we've seen from the Liberals is, clearly we pushed them on dental care. There's some work around, interim supports on rental, on the rental front. But there are folks that, this is not a government like previous Liberal, dare I even invoke Pierre Trudeau, with whom I have no affinity, but there's no vision, right? There's no desire to sort of like, let's come up with a visionary housing plan that we know would lead to the creation of good jobs and economic growth. These are folks that are again keen to talk the good talk, make some adjustments on the edges, and but all the time prop up a system where the wealthy are getting wealthier, including by taking advantage of the housing market, right? So I would say I hear you loud and clear on the need to look at ultimatums. I think it's something that we need to be looking at. Please feel free to share that message with some of your progressive friends, as you clearly obviously are, because and I think politically for the NDP, it'll be very difficult to carry on supporting a government that's not actually delivering on working people's priorities, on the priorities of people on fixed incomes. So we need to be mindful of that, very mindful of that as we go forward. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Niki, we got time for just a couple more questions here. Tom or Rob? Feel free. I keep talking to more and more.
Hi, Niki. My name's Tom McLean. I'm National Vice President of Canadian Union Skilled Workers, and I guess I live in parts unknown, like Anthony Bordeaux, kind of all over the place. Anyway, maybe this is a little bit more of a narrow thing, but when you mentioned grassroots in your conversation, and this group is grassroots. They're Canadian unions. At least 3 affiliates have fought their ways out of American-controlled unions, and and this is clearly a left-leaning group, which is why our organization is very interested in being in this room. But what we've seen, and I'm sure you're well aware of the building trades, too, which we view as a right-wing business union structure. And so over the last decade, 2 decades, there's been Canadian startup unions, in particular construction industry. And but laws, barriers, and of course, friends of the American unions have put all sorts of barriers up from Canadian unions being able to even get to certain projects, bid certain projects, or being able to get more involved in trying to Canadianize the industry. I mean, we send the building trades are American controlled. We send tax-free money over the border to fund their executives. If you looked at the opulence of their facilities and their buildings, and that's been the problem with our industry here. Also, is it's controlled from from the U.S. and there's a handful of Canadian. They're being very successful, but they're up against a machine, and that's I just kind of wanted to point that out to you. The fact that here this is all Canadiana, and that's our brand, and that's where we're going. And I guess my question is, how can you help remove those barriers so that we can get equal access to projects?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that, and I am familiar with that struggle, certainly in regions like ours, where we have so many projects that rely on the trades, infrastructure related projects, right? We're a resource heavy part of the resource sector heavy part of the country, and I really appreciate how you framed it in clear terms, both in terms of profit and gain, but also, I would argue in terms of sovereignty as well. I think your work is really critical in differentiating from unions who perhaps whose center of power is in the States, is outside of our country, and I think it's certainly something that I know a number of us feel strongly about in the NDP is ensuring that certainly amongst progressives, right, that that we don't just recognize all labor and unions as being the same, but we're recognizing I would say the way in which particular commitments like the ones you mentioned to being Canadian Canadian-led, Canadian-based, all of that is something we need to value and recognize, and obviously integrate in the kinds of projects that we support. So I think that's certainly something, and I appreciate the reminder that is so important. And I will say that I'm very thankful for so many Canadian labor activists who have been clear that part of the struggle against globalization, a globalization that obviously has created immense wealth for very few at the expense again of working people, is a globalization. That's a kind of an analysis that we should be applying into our daily work, right? In terms of the kind of politics that we practice, and that includes the kind of labor politics that we practice, who we support and how we support workers as well. So I and I'm a huge supporter of international solidarity, but what's clear to me is that work like the work that you are doing, and that labor activists that prioritize homegrown solutions and I would say support for Canadian workers is really what is going to propel us moving forward. And it's clear to me, and we've seen this time and time again, that in the US and that includes many workers as well, they will look out for their own country's well-being, again, oftentimes at the expense of others. We here in Canada need to be looking at what's good for Canadian workers, not at the expense of other countries, obviously, but and that's why, I guess I appreciate the comment that you raised, and hear you loud and clear that that's a reminder to support the work that you're doing and the vision that you've always put forward. Thank you.
All right, we have one more question for you, Nick. Oh, I called my dog.
Hi, Niki. My name is Robert, and I work at the University of Manitoba as well. My question is around post-secondary funding directly to students. Now, I don't know a lot on this, but I understand in the next decade or two, the population demographics of potential students is going to shrink for attending post-secondary education institutions. These institutions will need to make up that shortfall in funding, and most likely thus increasing the cost of getting a post-secondary education. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Can I just clarify, when you say the U of M, which workers do you represent?
Oh, sure. I'm part of, I work for the University of Manitoba in IT. I'm part of ACES Union, and we're part of the CCU. But I'm just speaking in general, we're hearing a little about that affecting more in the US, that the population demographic is shrinking. But that's going to happen here in Canada, and then costs and shortfalls by institutions will need to be made up, and either they're most likely going to go after the cost of receiving an education.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, who can afford to have kids, right? It's besides obviously the sort of post-boomer side of things. as the mother of twins, I can young twins, right? I can certainly attest to and anyway of just some of the challenges, and let me not get started on the lack of childcare, right? So yeah, absolutely, that's going to have implications on a number of key sectors, including post-secondary. And I think that I think Canada's really lost the plot when it comes to being to again being visionary when it comes to post-secondary education. We know a number of like-minded countries, not to the south of us, but the Scandinavian countries, other European countries that offer free tuition, have some of the most highly skilled, educated workforces in the world, and because they prioritize post-secondary education, right? And they also don't have significant birth rates, right? But yet they view investment in public and also access when it comes to post-secondary as a priority. Canada, unfortunately, is the opposite. And of course, I'm actually a U of M alumni, right? I mean, I'm lucky to have done my undergrad when the NDP was in power and kept tuition fees low and accessible. A lot of kids from where I come from, here in the north, couldn't even dream of moving to the city to go to school if that wasn't the case. And we know that for certain schools, engineering, medicine, et cetera, it is far worse. And so I would say, certainly I know nationally, we in the NDP have been saying that there needs to be significant attention put to post-secondary. I am certainly a proponent of free tuition because I think that it shifts the focus back to what this really is about, is education, educating our young people, and obviously supporting the staff, faculty, those that do the work, not ballooning administrations and organizations that we're seeing that in universities that are looking at profit motives. So I believe. And when we hear austerity and talks of a recession, I mean, that only means trouble when it comes to post-secondary sectors, both in terms of hiking tuition fees and obviously coming after staff and faculty. I want to acknowledge that the U of M faculty did fight back in a very inspiring way not too long ago. Against a very right-wing government, right? So good things again happening on the ground here in Manitoba. But please, and to those in the room, keep pushing for investment in post-secondary at the national level, with I would say a clear view in terms of access, because I mean, if you leave it to folks like Chrystia Freeland and the like, it's just going to be another cash cow for the ultra wealthy. So let's keep up the pressure on that front, as well as the other ones that were raised today.
Thank you.
Niki, do you have time for one more question?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. It's a Saturday.
Hello, Niki. My name is Rosa Barigin. I work in Quebec. I'm from Quebec. I work in telecommunications for Tata Communications. Actually, it's not a question. It's just a comment I would like to do. We talked at the beginning with you about the health, the amount of transfer that was done this week to the provinces. These amounts have been decreasing over the years. It is very important for the provinces that they get their share. I think that as a politician, you have a great power of influence, and I think that you are using it and should be still using it. What I think in your role is very important to influence the thinking and influence the mind of people. In this room, if you look the average of the age, we're not very young, okay? And we're just getting older. So this money will be important. These transferred are not following the increase that there is presently with inflation. So it is important that these numbers get better for the province, because at the end, it's not the federal that will be guiding the province itself. It's the province that will have to share that money with their citizens. So it's important that the share that the federal is doing to the province gets better. Thank you.
I agree. Well said. Merci beaucoup pour avoir partagé ce message vraiment clair and yeah.
Hold on. I have to sit back.
Yeah. Oh, no problem. That's okay. I can see many people. Actually, I love this view. This is great. I
wish I could speak English as fluent as you're doing it, and because it's very clear, it's very how can I say, attractive. And when I see you speaking, for me, I am also in politics, and I wish I could speak to you more. But the main power that we have as politicians is to influence, and I ask you to influence more. That's what is my comment. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Très bien. Ben, merci à vous. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a very inspiring message. And I would say that much of what you shared today, well, everything you should, certainly the key priorities you shared, I look forward to bringing them back to our team. I think it's very important that we hear the messages that you've shared today, that working people are sharing with us loud and clear, including on you know, the threats we need to be taking seriously on the right, and how we move forward with this agreement with the Liberals. You know, I mean, what a dynamo team. And as for age, I mean, we're all getting older, but I will say, you know, I think we're seeing some very exciting activism from young folks, but it is so important to learn from the work that you've done, you know, the movement that you've helped build, and let's find ways to build that solidarity to fight back, because like I said, in the weeks and months ahead, years ahead, it is only movements led by working people, rooted in our communities, you know, in solidarity with those that have been pushed to the margins, that will make the difference that we all deserve. And I would argue that our future depends on it. So keep up the important work. Thank you so much for having me with you today.
Thank you very much, Niki.
Take care. Enjoy Ottawa.
We will. Without the canal, though.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Yet another issue. Yeah. Take care and keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Be well.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.